My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee. I was born in San Francisco in 1940. I'm 24 right now.
There are various kinds of strike. It depends on where you hit, then what weapon you will be using. To the eyes, you would use fingers.
Before the arenas, before the cameras, before the name meant anything to anyone, there was just a skinny kid from Hong Kong who nobody in America was ready to take seriously. Bruce Lee was born in San Francisco in 1940, but the city that actually made him was Hong Kong. That's where he grew up. That's where childhood wasn't soft or supervised. It happened in alleys and on rooftops, where street fights came as regularly as homework, and losing one could cost you more than your pride. By the time he was a teenager, he had already been in more real exchanges than most trained fighters, twice his age. The streets gave him instinct. Wing Chun under the legendary Yip Man gave his instincts a spine. When he arrived back in America at 20, he had almost nothing in his pockets and a head full of ideas the American martial arts world wasn't remotely ready to hear. No credentials that meant anything here, no famous name attached to his. No gym behind him, no promoter, no network. Just a 5'7" kid with fast hands and a very specific kind of quiet confidence that either draws people in immediately or makes them want to prove it's unearned. He started small, a garage in Seattle, then Oakland, then Los Angeles. He charged $20 a month and opened the door to everyone. College kids, housewives, black students from the rough end of Oakland, Berkeley hippies, boxers who'd heard whispers, karate practitioners who'd been told there was a teacher somewhere in California who moved faster than the human eye could track. Bruce didn't care where you came from or what you looked like. A student was a student. A fighter was a fighter. To him, that was simply how it should be. To the old guard watching from the outside, it was a scandal waiting to detonate. The American martial arts world he had walked into was a closed, hierarchical club with very clear rules about who belonged where. Karate was booming. Judo had Olympic respectability. Boxing was king. Kung Fu, by comparison, was treated like a curiosity, beautiful in silk uniforms, interesting in theory, but fundamentally decorative. People looked at this lean young man from Hong Kong and quietly wondered whether he could survive a genuine exchange with a real karate champion. Then a man named Yoichi Nakachi came looking for him. Third-degree black belt in karate, third-degree black belt in judo, founder of his own system called Shinpu Ren, the kind of credentials that commanded respect in every serious martial arts circle in America. They met on a MCA handball court. No referee, sworn witnesses, nothing formal. 11 seconds later, Nakachi was unconscious on the floor with a fractured skull. Bruce's foot had connected with his head like a baseball bat, finding a ball it had been waiting years to hit. 20 years of Nakachi's training erased in less time than it takes to tie a shoe. But the men who could have made that moment famous hadn't been in that room. The witnesses kept their word. The fight stayed buried in whispers. Bruce had made the loudest possible statement in the smallest possible audience. He was going to have to do it again. Bigger, louder, in front of people who couldn't look away and couldn't pretend they hadn't seen it. But the biggest threat to everything he was building didn't come from a rival fighter. It came from his own community. The man at the door of the Oakland school in 1964 was wearing traditional kung fu robes, and he was not smiling. His name was Wong Jack Man. In his hand was a piece of paper signed by the elders of San Francisco's Chinatown. The paper carried an ultimatum that sounds medieval today, but was deadly serious at the time. Stop teaching kung fu to non-Chinese students immediately, or fight the man they had chosen. There was no third option, no negotiation, no appeal process. Bruce read it. He laughed. Then he told Wong to start warming up. The unspoken rule that had governed Chinese martial arts for centuries was simple. These techniques were family property. The forms, the secrets, the methods had been passed down through bloodlines and ethnic communities for generations. Teaching white students, or black students, or any non-Chinese student wasn't just frowned upon. It was treated as a fundamental act of cultural betrayal. The elders weren't coming from nowhere. They were enforcing something they genuinely believed was sacred. Bruce saw it differently. His students paid rent. The rent covered the building. And a fighter was a fighter regardless of what they looked like. The fight began with both men circling and measuring distance. Bruce came in expecting what he always expected from a classical kung fu stylist, a fighter locked into rigid lines and formal stances, the kind of opponent his Wing Chun had been designed to dismantle at close range. Close the distance, control the center line, overwhelm with chain punches. He'd done it 100 times. Wong didn't give him that fight. Wong backed up, and then he kept backing up. Every time Bruce closed the distance, Wong pivoted away and reset at range. It wasn't cowardice, it was a strategy, and it was exactly the right strategy. Wing Chun is a close-range system. It is devastating within arm's reach and has almost nothing to say beyond it. An opponent willing to keep retreating and resetting is an opponent who has identified the one thing Wing Chun genuinely cannot handle. 3 minutes of chasing a man around a small room sounds manageable until you're the one doing it. The lungs burn faster than anyone expects. The legs begin to shake. The footwork, the famously clean, efficient Wing Chun footwork that Bruce had drilled for years, fell apart completely against an opponent who refused to give him a stable target. The accounts of how it ended have been split ever since. Linda Lee said 3 minutes, with Wong eventually trying to escape the room. Wong claimed 20 minutes, ending in a draw. Bruce's students backed Linda, Wong's people backed Wong. But every single version of the story agreed on one quiet, devastating detail. Bruce could not finish it quickly. The man who had put Nakachi on the floor in 11 seconds couldn't close out a kung fu traditionalist in a small room. That night in the apartment above the school, Bruce sat with Linda and said the sentence that would reshape the next decade of his life into something entirely different. He was finished with classical martial arts, done with systems, done with forms, done with the idea that drilling the same technique 10,000 times in a mirror produced a fighter rather than a performer. He had won the fight, and he had lost his religion. What rose from the ashes of that night would eventually silence an entire arena. The summer of 1967 arrived hot and charged, and Bruce Lee was heading back to the Long Beach International Karate Championships carrying weight that hadn't existed 3 years earlier. He had been there in 1964, a first appearance that left a small but unforgettable impression. A 1-inch punch demonstration that sent a volunteer stumbling backward and gave a handful of people in the room something to talk about for weeks. But small impressions weren't enough anymore. The stakes had multiplied quietly and significantly in the years between. The room he was walking into was stacked. Chuck Norris, already a tournament killer with a reputation that moved ahead of him into every arena he entered. Mike Stone, whose controlled aggression had broken bigger and more decorated men than Bruce. Joe Louis, who would go on to become one of the founding fathers of American kickboxing. These weren't enthusiasts. These were the most legitimately dangerous karate fighters in America, gathered in one place, watching. If Bruce stumbled even slightly in front of them, if anything he did looked like performance rather than genuine ability, the story would be written that night and never rewritten. Kung Fu was still the odd cousin at the table. The martial arts community had quietly reached a consensus. Beautiful in silk uniforms, philosophically interesting, completely unreliable in a real exchange. Nobody said it loudly. Nobody needed to. Bruce started with the 2-finger push-ups. He set himself on the floor in front of the entire audience, body straight as a plank, and lowered his full body weight down onto 2 fingers of one hand. Then he pushed up, then again. The room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when seasoned professionals suddenly realize they are watching something they have never personally seen done and are not entirely sure how to process. 2-finger push-ups aren't a trick. They require bone density, tendon strength, and whole body tension that most trained athletes simply don't possess. He wasn't finished. He called up his student Taki Kimura and tied a blindfold over his own eyes. Kimura came at him with real strikes from real angles, not cooperative, not choreographed, genuinely trying to make contact. Bruce intercepted them. Sometimes he redirected the attack before it completed its arc. Sometimes he was simply no longer where the strike was going. The blindfold didn't appear to slow him down in any measurable way. What the crowd was watching was the living proof of everything Bruce had been arguing in every gym and school and conversation for years. Mastery wasn't memorized form. Mastery was instinct, timing, the ability to read a body as it began to move, before the intention became the action. Then a figure stepped forward from the far side of the room, a 4-time world karate champion. And what was about to happen would stay with him and everyone in that arena for decades. His name was Vic Moore, 10th degree black belt, a fighter whose record had been built the hard way, in the toughest tournament circuits in America, against opponents who were genuinely trying to hurt him. If anyone in that room had the credentials to expose Bruce Lee as a skilled performer rather than a real fighter, Vic Moore was the man. Bruce explained the rules in a voice so calm it almost sounded careless. He was going to throw a single straight punch toward Moore's face. Moore didn't have to block it cleanly, didn't have to stop it, didn't even have to deflect it. He just had to touch Bruce's hand anywhere at any point as it traveled in, make contact. And Bruce would publicly admit defeat right there in front of everyone. The challenge sounded almost insulting in its simplicity. Every trained fighter in that room had spent thousands of hours drilling exactly this kind of exercise. Touching a hand moving toward your face was a basic reflex drill, something beginners worked on in their first weeks of training. The room almost laughed. This was not about reflex. Bruce settled into his stance. Moore raised his guard, weight balanced, eyes locked and focused the way a man's eyes get focused when his professional reputation is standing on the line in front of his peers. The room held completely still. Then there was a blur. The punch was already there, stopped a hair from Moore's face, and gone again. Moore's arm had not moved. His hand was exactly where it had been a full second before. His brain had not yet finished sending the signal. Bruce reset. Moore reset, this time with total concentration, every trained instinct dialed to maximum. Same result. The fist appeared and vanished. The world champion was standing exactly where he had started. They tried again, and again. Every single time, Bruce's fist slipped through Moore's guard, as if the guard were a suggestion rather than a barrier. Not because Moore was slow. By any normal human standard, Vic Moore was extraordinarily fast. But this was not a normal human standard. By the time Moore's nervous system processed the incoming threat and began formulating a response, the threat had already completed its entire journey and returned home. The crowd had stopped making noise. Not the polite quiet of people being respectful. The stunned silence of hundreds of trained eyes trying to process something that didn't match what they understood about the physical limits of human movement. Years later, Moore told a different story. He claimed he had blocked some of the punches, even landed a few strikes of his own. The problem was the footage, the witnesses. Chuck Norris was in that room. Joe Louis was in that room. Every serious fighter at that tournament had watched the same exchange from close range, and not one of them backed Moore's version. The world champion had been unable to lay a single finger on Bruce Lee, but speed was only half the equation. A man could be the fastest hand alive and still hit like a child if the strikes had no weight behind them. What Bruce did next cracked physics in the entirely opposite direction. A man named Bob Baker walked onto the Long Beach stage with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face that said he'd seen every martial arts demonstration trick in existence and wasn't about to be fooled by another one. Bruce raised his right hand and placed his fist against Baker's chest. 1 inch of space between knuckle and shirt, he asked Baker to brace himself. What happened next didn't look like a punch. There was almost no visible movement. A small rotation of the body, a snap at the wrist, and then Baker was airborne, slamming backward into a folding chair hard enough that the chair probably saved him from going through the wall behind it. The room went completely silent. Every fighter in that audience knew the fundamental rule. Striking power requires distance. You need the full arc of the arm, the full rotation of the hip, the full extension of the body to generate force worth talking about. Knockout punches don't come from 1 inch away. That's not opinion, it's physics, it's geometry. It's the basic mechanical reality of how human bodies generate force. Bruce had just deleted that rule in front of 200 trained eyes. A Stanford biomechanics researcher named Jessica Rose spent months afterward analyzing the footage frame by frame, running the calculations repeatedly because the numbers kept coming back impossible. From a single inch of movement, Bruce had generated over 500 newtons of force. Enough to crack ribs the way a child snaps a breadstick. The math didn't make sense until Rose traced exactly where the power was actually originating. It wasn't coming from his arm. It started in his back foot, pressed into the floor as if he were trying to push the planet itself in the opposite direction. That ground force traveled up through his calf, twisted through the thigh, accelerated through the hip rotation, fired through the core, channeled through the shoulder, and finally exploded into the fist. Then the wrist snapped at the precise last instant, like the cracking tail of a bullwhip. The arm was the final delivery mechanism, not the source. He had spent 15 years training to fire that entire sequence with millisecond precision. Each muscle group passing the force to the next at exactly the right moment. Nothing wasted, nothing working against anything else. Most martial artists generate somewhere around 30% of their theoretical maximum striking power because their muscle groups aren't synchronized. They fight each other as much as they cooperate. Bruce had spent 15 years learning to unlock the other 70%. Hundreds of fighters have studied that footage since 1964. They've copied the stance, drilled the weight transfer, practiced the hip rotation and the wrist snap. Some managed to push a volunteer back a few feet. Nobody in 60 years of serious attempts has come close to matching the original. The arena had seen enough to rewrite its own rulebook. But Hollywood was about to discover a completely different problem. William Bodine had directed over 300 films by the time he showed up on the Green Hornet set in 1966. Silent era, talkies, every major technical evolution Hollywood had produced. He'd seen everything the medium had thrown at a director. Nothing prepared him for what came back from the lab the day Bruce Lee threw his first punch on camera. The footage looked broken. In one frame, Bruce was standing still in his stance. In the very next frame, the stuntman was already flying backward. There was nothing between those 2 points. No motion blur, no transition, no visible movement of any kind. The camera department spent hours checking the equipment, absolutely convinced something had malfunctioned during the shoot. The equipment was fine. Film runs at 24 frames per second, a frame rate chosen specifically because it captures human movement completely. There's enough resolution at that speed to record every phase of a punch, a kick, a fall. Bruce's punches were completing their entire arc in less than 1/24th of a second. He was literally moving between the frames, invisible to technology specifically designed to capture human motion. Specialized high-speed equipment later measured one of his punches at 1/500th of a second, from the moment it left his hip to the moment of impact. Your brain takes longer than that just to register that something has moved. The producers had to sit down with the most dangerous martial artist in America and ask him carefully to please move at roughly half his actual speed so the cameras could follow him. A man who had spent 15 years of his life training to be faster than anyone alive was now being asked to slow down for the equipment. His favorite demonstration of the gap was a coin trick. He'd place a dime in someone's open palm 3 feet away and tell them to close their hand the moment they saw him move. They'd nod confident in their reflexes. He'd twitch almost imperceptibly. Their hand would snap shut. They'd open it and find a penny. The dime was already in Bruce's hand. He had crossed 3 feet, opened their palm, swapped the coins, and returned to position before their brain registered he'd moved at all. In one training session, he asked a student to block what he described as a light tap. The student dislocated his own shoulder, not from the impact, but from his own body violently overreacting to something moving faster than his nervous system could properly process. When Bruce made his own films, he solved the camera problem himself. He shot fight scenes at 32 frames per second and played them back at 24. That 8-frame difference gave his motion just enough visibility for an audience to track while preserving the quality that made it look unlike anything before. That technical choice is a significant reason why Enter the Dragon's fight scenes still look different from everything that came before or after. Stuntmen who worked those films later admitted freely that Bruce was restraining himself during takes. Hitting at his actual speed and power would have put them in hospitals. The body on screen was extraordinary, but the mind that had engineered that body was something else entirely. The garage looked like a library had collided with a gym at speed, and neither had survived cleanly. Anatomy textbooks leaned against Buddhist philosophy. Bodybuilding magazines stacked on top of combat manuals. Notebooks dense with observations, measurements, and training data on every surface. By 1965, Bruce owned over 2,500 books, almost everyone with pencil notes in the margins. Arguments with the author, questions raised mid-chapter, connections the author had never intended drawn between ideas on opposite ends of the shelf. He wasn't training in any conventional sense anymore. He was studying combat the way a scientist studies a disease, trying to understand the underlying mechanism rather than memorizing the surface symptoms. Two men quietly redirected his thinking during this period. James Yim Lee was an Oakland welder who had been lifting weights since the 1940s, at a time when most martial artists genuinely believed that building muscle would make you slower and more rigid. Alan Joe, the first Chinese-American bodybuilding champion, had spent decades developing a serious relationship with resistance training that the martial arts establishment was actively discouraging. The insight those conversations produced changed everything. Traditional martial artist trained techniques. Drill the same punch 10,000 times until it looked perfect in a mirror. The punch became automatic and reliable. And Bruce realized this was entirely the wrong question. The right question was simpler and more fundamental. What actually makes a punch dangerous in the first place? Speed comes from fast-twitch muscle fibers. Power comes from the coordinated activation of the entire body as a single unified system. Build those qualities directly and deliberately, and any technique you apply them to inherits them automatically. You don't need 10,000 repetitions of one punch. You need a body capable of making any movement fast, powerful, and precise. So instead of training techniques, he trained attributes. The week became a precision machine. Monday was weights, never more than 8 repetitions, always prioritizing explosive power. Tuesday was running, Wednesday was flexibility, Thursday targeted different muscle groups. Friday was the heavy bag, Saturday was sparring. Sunday was theoretically rest, except Linda would find him on the floor doing fingertip push-ups while reading, because an entirely unproductive day was simply incompatible with how he was built. Progressive overload became close to a religious conviction. Every session had to be harder than the previous one. He kept training notebooks with the detail of an accountant. By 1967, his workouts had been compressed into 30-minute sessions of such concentrated intensity that observers said watching was more exhausting than their own training. He carried spring-loaded grippers everywhere, in restaurants, in cars, mid-conversation, bending bottle caps off with his thumb between sentences while discussing philosophy or film or training theory. The body was being engineered into something new, but first he needed to burn the philosophy that had originally built it. One afternoon in 1967, Bruce walked into his school carrying a cardboard box. Inside it was nearly 20 years of his life. Certificates from Hong Kong, belts, diplomas with the signatures of masters who had taught him as a kid in Yip Man's school. The kind of credentials that represented decades of institutional respect and tradition in the martial arts world. His students filed in for class and watched him set the box on the floor calmly, the way a man sets down groceries after a long day. Then he tipped everything into a metal trash can and set it on fire. Nobody spoke. The belts curled in the heat. The paper went black. The signatures became ash. When he finally said something, all he said was, "No more classical mess." What was rising from those ashes had a name. He called it Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. The entire philosophy lived compressed in those 3 words. Most fighters wait for an attack to develop and then react. They block, parry, retreat, counter. Bruce had concluded that approach was already too late. By the time you're reacting to a punch, the punch is already happening. The only genuinely winning position was to intercept the attack at the moment it was still becoming. The instant the shoulder dips to initiate the throw, before the arm has even begun its journey. 3 principles replace the 10,000 techniques now turning to ash. Simplicity, 1 motion instead of 2, every unnecessary movement removed from the chain. Directness, the absolute shortest line between fist and target, no detours, no decoration. Freedom, moving like water, able to crash with overwhelming force when that's what the moment demands, and able to flow around an obstacle and reform when force isn't the answer. The synthesis was assembled from whatever worked, regardless of where it originated. Wing Chun's chain punches stayed, devastatingly effective at close range. Boxing's footwork replaced Wing Chun's rigid stances because mobility was non-negotiable. The fencer's straight thrust informed the lead hand because no attack is more direct than a lunge. Judo's leverage and control covered the grappling range. Parts from a dozen traditions stitched into something that belonged to none of them and was therefore limited by none of their assumptions. And at the center of everything, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. The old masters sent their best practitioners to test the new system. Each one left bruised and confused. His students were handling themselves confidently in real situations within 6 months. The system worked in the only laboratory that mattered. The philosophy was proven, but the body still had further to go. He did 200 fingertip push-ups as a warm-up, not for cameras, not as a demonstration, as the thing he did before the actual training started. Each finger carrying roughly 40 pounds of dynamic load per repetition, breathing even, sometimes mid-conversation about Taoism or training theory. The road to those fingers started in his backyard with a bucket of sand. Every morning at 5, he drove his fingertips into the bucket 500 times, not tapped, drove, with genuine force, conditioning the tissue progressively the way any serious athlete conditions muscle. After 6 months, the sand had become too easy. He switched to gravel. Sharp edges tore his skin daily. He finished sessions with blood in the stones and came back the next morning. Most people who attempted anything near this protocol ended up with permanent nerve damage. What Bruce developed instead were fingertips with a paradoxical dual quality, sensitive enough to feel a heartbeat through clothing, dense enough to drive through an inch of solid oak without a windup. When doctors examined him later, they found bone density readings beyond the calibrated range of their measurement equipment. His tendons had thickened into something that resembled industrial cable more than biological tissue. Then came the steel ball bearings. Small, heavy, nearly impossible to strike correctly because they roll the moment a finger lands off-center. 500 strikes every morning before breakfast, developing not just strength but the precision that makes strength worth possessing. Dan Inosanto handed him nunchaku for the first time in 1964. Bruce laughed and called them a toy. First attempt, cracked himself in the skull hard enough to draw blood. 3 months later, he was using them to play ping pong, returning every shot, discussing philosophy between volleys. His heavy bag weighed 300 pounds. Most fighters couldn't meaningfully shift it with a full-power kick. Bruce drove a sidekick into it and sent it swinging parallel to the floor, chain going completely slack. Then he'd kick it on the backswing. He could maintain that rhythm for several minutes, breathing as steadily as if he were walking. The body had reached places deliberate training rarely goes. But the most remarkable chapter was the one his opponents always assumed was his greatest vulnerability. Bruce Lee could not see his students' faces from across the training room. The United States Army tested him in 1963 and classified him 4F, medically unfit for service. The same vision that disqualified him from carrying a rifle did not stop him from becoming the most genuinely feared fighter alive. Most serious martial artists with that level of impairment would have found a different pursuit. Vision is considered foundational. You read telegraphs, track trajectory, judge distance and timing through what your eyes report. Without it, most fighting systems fall apart structurally. Bruce didn't find a different path. He took the limitation, examined it from every angle, and rebuilt his entire fighting system around it until the limitation was no longer a liability but the sharpest instrument in his arsenal. He stopped trying to read individual movements and learned to read bodies instead. The language that exists beneath the level of technique, written in posture, weight distribution, and micro-tensions that broadcast intention before it becomes action. A shoulder drops a quarter inch before a punch launches. Hips begin to rotate milliseconds before a kick fires. Weight shifts subtly from back foot to front before any forward attack. These signals exist whether the defender can see clearly or not, and Bruce trained himself to read them through the blur with a consistency that made clear-sighted opponents question what they were experiencing. Over time, he developed something training partners struggled to describe without reaching for language that sounded more mystical than physical. He could feel the displacement of air caused by a limb moving through space. The pressure wave from an incoming strike reached him before the strike did. Dan Inosanto described sparring with him as fighting someone equipped with radar. Attacks from blind spots, angles that should have been safe, were dodged and countered as if Bruce had been facing front the entire time. Chisao, the Wing Chun sensitivity drill where two practitioners maintain constant arm contact and read each other's intentions through touch, became his primary laboratory. Inosanto would blindfold him completely, removing even the limited visual information his corrected vision provided. Bruce still controlled the matches. He could identify exactly what attack was coming, based solely on microtensions in the muscles of a connected forearm, the slight pressure shift that preceded commitment to a technique. He trained this into his own home. Forms practiced in complete darkness. Students instructed to attack him without warning while he was blindfolded, learning to orient by sound and air displacement, and the subtle information that vibrates through a floor when weight shifts. The contact lenses of the 1960s were hard plastic discs that scraped the cornea with every blink. Bruce wore them through every film he made. Hours of physically demanding shooting, multiple takes, through constant pain that would have stopped most people before lunch. Between takes on Enter the Dragon, he slipped away to apply numbing drops that barely helped. He never mentioned it to anyone on set. Linda revealed it years after he was gone. The famous on-screen intensity, that locked, focused, almost unsettling quality that made audiences feel he was looking directly through the screen at them, came partly from forcing focus through plastic lenses wearing his eyes raw one take at a time. His opponents saw the glasses and saw a weakness. They built strategies around a man with bad eyes who depended on corrective lenses. They didn't know that the limitation had been taken and trained for 2 decades into the most sensitive perceptual system in any room he entered. Before the world understood what human speed could actually be, before Kung Fu had earned a single gram of the global respect it holds today, a boy from Hong Kong's alleys had already moved past every boundary the martial arts world thought was permanent. In a Long Beach arena in 1967, in a garage in Oakland, on a handball court, and in a small apartment above a school where he sat with Linda and told her he was finished with everything he had been, he kept rewriting what was possible. 60 years later, the world is still catching up.